The content discussed in this episode is for educational or informative purposes only and should not be replaced by individualized professional consultations or professional medical advice. Hey guys, I'm Tasha.
Hey listeners, this is Guni.
And you're tuned in to .if the podcast, where we chat and explore all things on integrative medicine. Ashwinni Manasseh is a counselling psychologist who specializes in perinatal mental health, which means she works with new and expecting parents. She also does a lot of work with people going through significant life or relationship changes and has specialized training in acceptance and commitment therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. Her career in counselling started in Melbourne, Australia, and now has continued across borders with Alliance Counselling in Singapore. She is also a badass, super cool mom to an adorable baby boy and is now working towards furthering her training in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so, without further ado, welcome Ashwinni to .if the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's very exciting to be talking about a topic that I'm very passionate about, both professionally and personally, experiencing it right now.
Ashwinni, you're a new mom, right? And most of your clients are new moms or new parents to be, basically. So in your experience, what are the common things you see or themes that you see with your clients?
That's a big question. I've got lots to share when it comes to, challenges that mums face. So I see mums, anything from newborn, who have just had babies, all the way until they have toddlers, multiple sometimes toddlers, and are just kind of struggling with the challenges of managing the unexpected things that come up with kids. So all sorts of stuff. There's grief and loss around birth that I see a lot as well. In fact, I myself struggled with that. Having a child, having an emergency C-section and a child brought to ICU, I found that
right
a real challenge for me.
What was, I guess, in summary, your experience with having that happen to you?
I think what was really difficult was I went into labor much earlier than I thought, so just not feeling prepared, practically even, but also prepared for what was to come, and being separated at birth from my baby. And that was, it was quite difficult. And I don't think I realized how much it impacted me until later on. And I would, go to see my obstetrician, or I would hear my baby crying. Those were really triggers for me because they would bring back lots of memories. And I found myself kind of kept going back to the birth and kind of going it over and over in my head. And so then I realized that I really do need to see somebody, and I sought treatment. I had EMDR, and it was fantastic. I
feel that women don't really want to talk about the negative side of it. For someone who hasn't had any children, I just feel that it's an experience that is somewhat glorified, and the whole thing of you're going to be glowing, etc. But secretly you feel that there is something that they're not telling you.
Absolutely.
And so you being specialized in that, in more the postpartum side, I think is very unique, and it kind of brings a light on something that women feel like they need to hide or not talk about. Do you know why it's a thing? And if it is, why do you think women kind of hide that side and don't really want to talk about it?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I do agree. I do feel like there's just so much that's unsaid. And I think women really go into this unprepared. And I hear women telling me why didn't anyone tell me that naps are going to be really hard, getting my baby to sleep during the day. Everyone says you won't get much sleep, but they never really tell you that actually even just getting your baby to sleep is really hard. And not only at night, it's during the day. I guess a lot of women, I don't know, I think we'd like to show that we're coping really well. We like to put on this super mom kind of look, and we are quite guarded. We don't want to share our vulnerabilities. We don't want to tell people when we're struggling, because maybe it means acknowledging that, we are struggling, and them it might feel like a failure. I know, I mean, the circle of friends I have are very open, but I know there's still a lot of shame and stigma talking about not coping. And sometimes moms feel guilty when they say anything negative about their birth experience or parenting, because a lot of shame comes up. They'll think I'm a bad mom if I talk negatively about my baby or my birth. I should only share that I'm happy. And actually, that's why they call it smiling depression. So postnatal depression is actually called smiling depression because on the outside, like moms look like they're coping, they kind of have to, right? They have to get on with things. They're out with other moms. They may have to look like they're coping, but often it's under the covers that they're crying. And so it's one of those types of depression that is actually quite hard to detect because on the outside, they look often like they've got it all together, put on a bit of a show, but actually, behind closed doors, most women are struggling. And that's actually one thing I share a lot with other moms in counseling. I spend a lot of time normalizing that, like, tell them, like, actually, I hear this all the time. Like, you're not the only mom. I'm feeling that way. And sometimes that's enough to make them feel like significantly better.
Yeah.
Right. It's so interesting that you pointed that out because moms have to cope. They have to just manage. And because they're always playing this role of like, I need to just deal with it. Your mind also is like trying to believe the message you're sending. And so if you lack that awareness, then it's easy to just like buy the message that you're selling yourself. I can imagine that being like a real difficult cycle to break, especially because being a mom is like, it's always on, right? And then that's why it makes it hard to detect.
Definitely. And yeah, there's just no kind of pausing and checking in with yourself. And there's so much, it's like all the focus is always on the baby that moms really tend to neglect themselves. That's a real problem. I guess that's when they get burnt out and can slip into depression or anxiety.
I remember having my cousin. So her mom went to see her and was there to say, I'm going to take care of my daughter and not the child. Because as you were saying, is that from the moment the child is delivered, the focus is directly on the child. And in the same time, I had another friend who was from Portugal, but her mom said, I'm going for the baby. And I thought, okay, different perception or goals. And the mother is supposed to deal with the trauma of like this human being that is leaving your body after 9 months. And I guess that also physically speaking, like literal physical separation. And so she's into Ayurveda. So she brought in some herbs for the healing part of her daughter. And she was focused on her daughter and not on the baby. And whereas the Western side was more, how can I help you with the child, more taking care of the child. And I thought it was such a powerful moment as like a mother-daughter type of experience, because at least she's been seen, do you feel that you kind of, as a mother, you disappear for like as a person for a bit?
I can see how that could happen if you don't have the right support. I think it really depends. I think each woman is so different. I know in Asian culture, a lot of the women I see, they have a confinement nanny who lives with them for at least the first month and cooks for them, gives them massages, does everything for the baby so the mother could rest. And a large part of that is because there's acknowledgement that the mom needs to heal. The mom, has had major like, changes in their body and is healing, and whether it's labor or a C-section, is sleep deprived. And they really do see in this culture, at least I'm in Singapore, the need for support for moms. And actually, as a psychologist, I really do see the benefit in that, because if your cup is not full, then you don't have anything to pour for this child. So moms do really need to put themselves first. And I think, just to everyone out there, like when you are visiting a mom, or whether it's a friend or a relative and they've just had a baby, like try to look at the mom and ask the mom, how are you feeling? How are you coping? Sometimes, again, even as visitors, we just straight away attend to the baby, and like our fixation is just on the baby and how beautiful they are, which is of course part of it, and you will do that. But take time to acknowledge the mom and ask her specifically, like, how is she feeling emotionally? That question can really go a long way.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip to practice. So you said like one of the first trauma point might be like, from delivery, right? And other than that, what are the other things that they come to you for?
Yeah, so I guess as a new mum, one of the biggest issues would be like breastfeeding that women struggle with. That is one thing that I think they assume is just kind of going to happen naturally. How hard can it be? There's so much focus and preparation on the birth, and that comes immediately after the birth. Yet there's little preparation for that part, and that is what women really struggle with a lot, because they may not have the right support in the hospital. It's very normal. Their milk won't come in for a couple of days. And it can be very stressful because hospitals may start to suggest formula, and that may not be what they want. And they may feel pressured to go down that track. They feel the stress that their milk is not coming in. Baby may not be latching. There may be weight concerns. So it can be a very stressful time and puts a lot of pressure on the mum to feel like they need to provide for their baby, and they're failing if they can't feed their baby that way. Right. Of course, there's mums who choose not to, but there's a lot of pressure to breastfeed. Right. And of course, because there are benefits of it, it also comes from, WHO has advised that it's important to breastfeed exclusively, for the first year, and then maybe from your own community, even online, they're part of just social media also, and amongst their mom group friends, watching other women being able to do it. So one thing I would really suggest is finding the right support for breastfeeding. I think a lot of women forget there are people out there who can help you. And as much as doing birth preparation classes are important, you can actually do a pre-lactation consult. So even before you have the baby at 37 weeks, you can have a lactation consultant help you do colostrum harvesting, which helps the milk come in, helps you freeze colostrum. So then if your baby has to go to ICU or your milk doesn't come in straight away, it just takes that pressure off.
Sorry, what is colostrum?
Colostrum is the liquid gold that comes out those first few days or after the baby is born, but you actually start to produce it already while you're pregnant in those last few weeks. So you can hand express, put it into syringes and freeze it. I'm not an expert in this, but my mom's a lactation consultant, so I have some experience. She helped me a lot. And it's actually more about being comfortable with your body, learning how your breasts work. It's just one less thing to have to figure out after a baby comes out. It's how your body functions. And if you can kind of get comfortable with that before, and your husband can even, learn how to support you with breastfeeding before the baby comes, it's just one less thing to deal with once the baby's there.
Interesting. If I look at my mom, her experience with breastfeeding, she would tell us about this. And she said it was a horrible experience because for her, it actually hurt so much that every time, she was breastfeeding my brother, she said she would dread that moment. And so she started giving formula quite early. And that stigma that goes to, I think it goes back to expectations or what society thinks you should be doing and what your body can do or what you're expecting for yourself. For her, till this day, she's women who do not want to breastfeed, she's totally for them. I think it goes to another extreme. But would you be able to explain why it would hurt that much?
I'm not an expert in this, but I think the most important thing is choice. Firstly, health professionals, should really just ask what would they like to do? Not assuming that every woman would like to breastfeed. Some women don't want to for personal reasons, any reason really, it doesn't matter, but it's really about choice.
Interesting that you said that. One of my good friends was telling me that when she gave birth to her second son in Belgium, I think she had a lot of stress and she was actually struggling. She really wanted to breastfeed and she understands the value in it. And her doctors and her nurses were actually shaming her for not breastfeeding. And she kept telling them she's trying, and she already saw a lactation consultant and she was still struggling with that. And this is what I couldn't understand. Why is a medical professional making you feel worse about something that you are trying to fix, right? So I can imagine the trauma on top of the pressure that you put on yourself, the society kind of telling you this is how you should do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, they get it. I mean, there's a lot of pressure. I think that many people are pro breastfeeding, and that can make a woman who doesn't want to or who's struggling feel a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And it can be a very tough part of this postpartum period for a lot of moms. If for women who want to breastfeed, getting support is really important. For women who choose not to breastfeed, sticking by that, if that's important to you, that's okay. And there will be a lot of stuff out there, but you need to surround yourself by professionals that support your values and your choices. And if there are family and friends and social media that is making that choice hard for you, then really kind of setting some boundaries on that for your own mental health.
Okay, makes sense. So there's one thing that I'm dreading from being pregnant, if that happens to me, is the change in my body. from stretch mark to actually having like just that experience is kind of scary. What have you picked up on with your clients or with regards to body change?
That's a big thing that comes up for several reasons. For some women, just the physical changes actually can impact their functioning. So even incontinence, or if it can affect their ability to exercise. And some of them are quite active before they have babies, and then they really need to slow down.
That's you, Goonie.
Yeah, I was like, how am I going to be like back on my treadmill, or even just running, or just like, that recovery period. And even when you're pregnant, right? You can't really necessarily work out as much as you used to. So yeah, definitely activities.
On a side note, I just remembered this thing when I was in Sri Lanka on a holiday. I climbed like the Sigiriya rock, and there was a woman, and she had a newborn with her in like this sling, and she was climbing the rock, and it was raining, and I was shocked and also amazed at the same time, and could see myself judging this woman because I'm like, how is she doing this, and is this something she should be doing?
But it's interesting, as you were saying that, I was thinking so many mums like look at other mums in that way and think, oh my god, how come she's doing it and I can't? How come this woman's lost so much weight and I haven't? And how come, there's so much comparison that goes on at this stage, and you're not really being kind to yourself when you do compare yourself. And everyone's recovery, is going to look different depending on what kind of birth you had, your own body, your baby, your support system. Everyone's recovery is different. So really focusing on your own situation. Again, giving yourself time to recover, like taking it slow. I think a lot of women forget how much they've been through. Their body and their whole being has been through birth, and they have a lot of pressure to like, maybe at 3 months, I need to get back into activity again. And sometimes they set really unrealistic goals. So be kind to yourself, give yourself time, ease into it. I would say as well, a lot of women forget that even after you've had the baby, you also need to regularly seek consultation from like a women's physio. There's a lot of changes that happen down there with pelvic floor issues, incontinence, vaginismus can happen, prolapse. Lots of changes to our bodies in terms of women's health issues. So again, I'm not a specialist in this, but I would definitely recommend seeing a women's physio after giving birth. Usually I think it's after 6 weeks you should see someone for how you can recover. But osteopath or chiropractor, just to kind of get your alignment back again. And there's lots of aches and pains that come with breastfeeding and delivery, and just getting all of that checked out.
I wonder, Ashwini, like if for me, I'm not a mom, right? But then as an outsider who's not gone through the process, I often think that like, oh, if our ancestors did this, without any like guidance and assistance from, medical professionals, how come we can't do the same thing, right? Why can't we just take this natural healing process and natural process of delivering? Is that something that like you see that comes up as an issue?
Yeah, I definitely notice that there is this difference. Not necessarily what my clients are saying, but just from my own observation, from my own parents and their generation. I think part of it is them lacking resources and knowledge. I think a lot of these women like have issues, like Goodie's mom who's having pain with breastfeeding, and like maybe at that point, like I don't know if lactation consultants were like really well trained in this area. Even like women may have incontinence now. Our moms, our grandmas, we don't know about that. But maybe if they saw women's physios like we do now, they may have had years of like, pelvic floor training and exercises that may have helped prevent some of that. So I think one part may be lack of our awareness and their awareness of the support. And it's also, our lifestyles are also very different, right? I don't know about your parents and grandparents, but my parents told me they used to walk a lot more than we used to, and ride bicycles, and, they weren't living as sedentary lifestyles as we are. So I'm sure that has a big part to play in how our bodies cope with these changes.
Yeah. Like I guess with what Guni just said, like how women generally set high expectations of themselves. How much of that stress, and, if you're not able to meet that, right, how much of that stress actually can translate and pass on to a child and have an impact on the child?
Yeah, that's something I think about even in parenting right now, right? So if we're constantly aiming to be perfect, like our child doesn't see us as human. And then when they make mistakes, or if they're not good enough, they're going to feel like they're failing. So even today, even though I'm a psychologist, I make mistakes all the time. And like my son he's almost 2, and he was driving me, nuts today, just spilling water, throwing food, not eating anything, just one of those days. And I raised my voice at him, and I don't often do that, but I had really like reached my threshold, and I raised my voice. And I realized in that moment that like I have this power to like use that moment as a teaching moment. Like I could kind of, you know, beat myself up about it, or I could actually use that as a moment to like help him see that this is really normal. Sometimes you know, we're all human. And so I just sat down and I apologized to him for raising my voice, and he just said like, okay, mommy, like, you know, he actually took note of it, and he actually realized what I was saying. And yeah, I mean, like just teaching them to like forgive themselves, that if you can forgive, modeling, that's the word, modeling. If you can model to your children that like you're human, you make mistakes, but what's more important is the repair attempts. Relationship, right?
Completely.
Yeah, so I guess like we talked about the trauma from labor, the breastfeeding challenges, and even body changes. And I think one of the points I wanted to touch on is also like baby sleep cycles. I noticed this was something a few of my new mom friends had a lot of obstacles with, because, you know, there's so many schools of thought about how to train your baby to sleep and how to care for your baby, you know, in that space. What's your kind of take on this?
Yeah, this is definitely like a very sensitive topic. I didn't realize that until I came into this mom world and realized like how there are very different schools when it comes to sleep.
Right.
So with the women I see, a lot of them struggle with like this loss of control that they have before they have babies. So when we're so used to routine, and then we have a baby, and like we don't know when they're going to sleep, when they're going to wake, it can be really stressful and hard to plan things. It can make you sleep deprived. And I see a lot of women who struggle just with anxiety around like infant sleep. There's so many websites out there written by a lot of them are laymen, just stating like what like sleep schedules and like how long they should be sleeping for in different age groups, their wake windows, and like very precise. And women who generally like have this need for like control and perfection and routine, they tend to hold on to these things too tightly, and then they start getting really anxious because they're like, oh, it's like 3:00 and my baby should have gone down for a nap and they haven't yet, and they get really stressed. I see a lot of women who come in because they're just like, I can't cope, like what's wrong with my baby, what am I doing wrong? And I just see that sometimes like these schedules that they read online or hear about from other mums, you know, it can be very unhelpful because firstly, they're not research-based. Secondly, they're just like, it's like a one model fits all, which every baby is different. So I know my baby was extremely low sleep needs compared to his other babies his age. And so it can make you feel like something is wrong if you follow these routines too closely. So what I would suggest to moms is, I guess, as you're reading these things, just first of all, check your sources, make sure that they're research-based, take them lightly. Like, okay, maybe that's what some babies do, but always look at what works for your baby and try to follow their lead a little bit, because sleep is one thing we cannot control. And it can get so obsessive to the point where women like won't even leave the house because they want to make sure that their baby like goes down at this time for their nap time. And that can lead to depression. So this is where my concern comes in, really. It's not so much about the infant sleep, it's about how it affects the mom who gets so fixated on these schedules. And so the two schools of thought are either you sleep train your baby, and the other school of thought is no sleep training, which is tough because it means you just need to kind of go with where your baby is at. And it might mean co-sleeping. It might mean like breastfeeding on demand, not really following any schedule. And I think in our society, it is really hard because a lot of women have to go back to work. I think it's a societal issue as well, because women have to go back to work sometimes at 3 to 4 months, and they cannot cope with a baby who doesn't have a sleep routine. They cannot be sleep deprived in their jobs. So they feel really stuck and desperate. And that's when they go in to look into these kind of sleep training schools. And for some women, you know, it works and it's very helpful. But the other school of thought is that it could be harmful for the baby because some of this training requires babies to cry it out. So that's kind of just overview of these two schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think on this point is like a huge part is actually society, because everybody has to work now because it's a necessity. But as like an outsider who's seeing it, the other part is also like the expectations versus reality conversation we've been having is that they think having a baby is at their convenience, right? And so once the baby comes, it's like, okay, now let me go back to my normal life. But there's no such thing. Your life is completely changed, right? So you have to adjust and create a new type of life and routine. And this kind of expectation that they set is probably detrimental to their mental health in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, they may sometimes not really expect their lives to change so drastically. And so they may be looking at other moms and get their expectations from there. So I think asking themselves, where is this coming from? And being really realistic with that, like not adding pressure on yourself. Self-compassion is key to that. Just being kind to yourself, not comparing, and really, taking your time to get to where you are, not putting extra time pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our discussion with counselling psychologist Ashwinni Manasseh. Part 2 drops next week, where we demystify postpartum in the context of relationship changes new mothers experience with themselves and their partners. With that said, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and select that follow or subscribe button. For now, stay safe and we'll see you next week.